Right, would you ask Mr. Pargeter to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Pargeter, ready to carry on?
I am.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pargeter, can we now please go to KIN 307445? I'm hoping what appears is a redacted version of this document, and I only need to look at the first part of it. This is an instant messenger chat between two of your technical team, Pete Moss and Aaron Chalmers, and it's linked, as you can see from the very top of the page, to an email from Pete Moss to himself on the 9th of November 2016. So this is during your tenure as head of marketing and technical. Conversation with Pete Moss, and it's quite difficult to read, so bear with me. But it says at 16:30, mate, Pete Moss, mate, he says, and then underneath that, has class 0 fire performance throughout entire product in accordance with BS 476, close quotes. Which alternatives can we propose? Aaron Chalmers comes back, class 0 board, K15 or K10, Pete Moss, and K110, question mark? Aaron Chalmers, well, yeah, the Solstice alternatives, not K5 anymore, though. Pete Moss, cool, thank God I got it right. Aaron Chalmers, all in the facing, my friend, and there's a smiley face. Pete Moss, yeah, you wanted to use K7, and I said any K10, K110, K15 are comparable, whereas K7 is a class 1 surface spreader flame and not a class 0 product. Aaron Chalmers doesn't actually get class 0 when we test the whole product, though. Lol. Peter Moss, what? In capitals. We lied? Question mark. Honest opinion now. DW. Aaron Chalmers, yeah. Tested K15 as a whole, got class 1. Well, hey, lol. Pete Moss, well, hey, shit product, scrap it. Aaron Chalmers. But England Wales is worded in such a way that it, quotes, implies, unquotes, the facing can give you class 0. Scotland is written better, therefore our product is not class 0 in Scotland, ha ha. But don't tell anyone that. What, like fire performance? Ha ha. Kingspan Cool Therm K10 is class 0. Whoops. Kingspan Cool Therm K15 is class 0, non-combustible. What? K15 doesn't say that, question mark, and then over the page. Look who knows their way. Look who knows their shit. Aaron Chalmers. Yeah, all lies, mate. Pete Moss, just tickling your balls, mate. Aaron Chalmers. So class 1 is on K7, K12, 8. Dan got class 2. I'm retesting to hope. Pete Moss, fire performance. Kingspan Cool Therm, K7 pitch roof board is class 1. Aaron Chalmers, balls. All we do is lie in here. Pete Moss, I. And then it goes on. And then it turns into a personal question, which thankfully has been redacted. Now, I've shown you that because although it's not particularly literary, it's certainly clear as to what it's saying. Is this what your own technical team thought of the bit of a cheat about the class 0 on how to present class 0 on K15?
I mean, reading that, it's certainly not the view that they espouse externally, and it was very disappointing to read that from my perspective.
But when he says on page 2, does Mr. Chalmers, that all we do is lie in here, I mean, these messages were clearly never meant to see the light of day. But when he says that, it was, I have to put to you, a true, if pithy, summary of Kingspan's culture at the time.
I don't believe that's true at all.
That was what was happening in your technical department under your tutelage.
No, I disagree with that, absolutely.
I mean, you had been in charge of this department for some 2.5 years by this point. How do you account for this attitude to occur? And it's not just the attitude or the tone of the discussions. People would find that less shocking than actually what they were talking about. How can you explain that?
I can't, because that's not a culture that I endorse or foster at all.
But do you accept that a culture of lying about the safety, fire safety of products is particularly serious because you're taking risks with people's lives and the safety of their homes?
No, I don't believe that we are lying. I think that I can't explain why they're describing it as such in that way between the two of them.
But there's no major differences there, other than a difference in perhaps tone between what they're talking about and the bit of a cheat email that Aaron Chalmers sent to you. Is there?
I think there is. I think this is a very different approach, if you like. It's not the same as what they espouse externally.
Let's look at your second witness statement, at paragraph 3.18 on page 10, please. And it's quite a long paragraph, and we've seen some of it before, I think, about the differences between England and Scotland. And I'd like to pick it up at halfway down the page, where it says these test results, and you're talking about results for BS 476, 6 and 7. You say these test results also impacted on our Class 0 status in England and Wales because we were relying on the same composite tests to claim Class 0 in England and Wales. However, as the definition for Class 0 in England and Wales is different to low risk in Scotland, as set out in paragraphs 316 and 317, it allows the surface of a composite product, such as K15, to be tested. The foil facer was tested separately and achieved the requirements of Class 0. In order to reflect these changes in what part of the product had been tested, Kingspan updated the K15 product literature in October 2017 to define its Class 0 status as achieves Class 0 as defined in approved document B in England and Wales. Now, were the tests that you're referring to the tests done by Dan Ball in 2016, in which he couldn't achieve the required propagation index for K15?
The tests in 2016 were on the facer, so I think the tests on the product may have been earlier than that.
Right. Did you know that in August and September 2016 that there was discussion internally about the Part 6 and 7 tests up to that point?
In August 2017.
2016.
2016. Yes.
Yeah. Let's look at that. It's KIN 404213, please. And I'm going to come back to the wording of the certificate later, but if you look at this email run, this is an email chain in late August, early September 2016, and if we look at page 2 at the start of the chain, it starts with Stacey Deeming at Exova sending Dan Ball the results on the BS 4766 and 7 tests so far. And you can see that if you look at the second email from the bottom in the middle of page 2, which is just above the Stacey Deeming email, Dan Ball sends these to you. You see that?
Yes.
And perhaps just to be fair to you, we need to see the whole of the Stacey Deeming email. And she says, "Hi Dan, as I thought, the testing has at the minute been suspended and held at the indicative stage as a result of poor Part 6 results on the first specimens. The results obtained so far are as follows." And then she sets them all out. Product ref Cooltherm K15. And that goes over the page to page 3, where she says, currently indicating a Class 1 result is possible. And the rest is for K5. And then at the end she says, "Can you please confirm how you wish for us to proceed with this testing? Do you wish for us to complete any of the testing or stop the testing at this indicative stage?" You see that? Now,
yes.
If we go back to page 2, we can see that, as I say, Dan Ball sends the results to you, to Adrian Brazier and Adam Heath. And he says this: "No cigar again. K15 was worse than the K5. Both look on track for a Class 1, but neither as a finished product have met the criteria for Class 0. This is where the regs that state that you can claim it from the facing starts to cause issues. We have a Class 0 facing on K15, and therefore, according to Part B, can then claim that anything with that facer is Class 0. But when tested as a complete product as placed on the market, it's not Class 0. Kind regards, Dan Ball." Now, just pausing there, Dan Ball is clearly pointing out to you that saying that a composite product is Class 0 because its surface is Class 0, when the composite itself fails Class 0, causes issues. He says it causes issues. You could see that, couldn't you? That's what he's telling you.
Yes.
Did that not prompt you to see the absurdity of the position of your decision that you apparently still stand by today, which is selling a composite product as Class 0 when it has failed a 476 Part 6 test, merely because the surface alone, when tested separately, passed?
It didn't, because I think, like I've said before, I think the interpretation is fair. The test is not designed for this type of material. So you get these extraneous results. On the fire propagation side of it, it always gets a Class 1 because the facer doesn't come off, but in the Part 6, the facer comes away and you get a false result. So I think it's still a fair interpretation.
Even though, as he's clearly making it plain to you, K15 as a product, which people buy as a product, they don't buy it separately, they buy K15 as a composite product, would fail a 476 test.
It would fail to achieve the requirements for Class O on the 476 Part 6 element of it. That's correct. It would.
And if we go to your response to his email, because you do respond to it, we can see what you say. Now, it comes in a little bit later, 5th of September, and you say, bottom of page 1, Dan, interesting results. I have a couple of questions. How do we determine the Class 0 certificate for K15 facer? Do we do it, or is it certified by the supplier? How do we account for the difference when tested as a combined part? Part question mark, perforations question mark. Why did you ask who certifies the K15 facer?
I thought it might be possible that a supplier would test the facer to that standard. It isn't the case, but I thought I'd ask the question.
And your question is, second question, how do we account for the difference when tested as a combined part? Question mark, perforations question mark. Was that not the key question? Because here we see you wanting to know how to explain the difference in performance between the composite as tested and the foil facer as tested. That was what you were asking.
Yes, that's right.
And that was the key question, wasn't it? Really?
Yes.
Yes. And again, you could see that one possible way of doing that would be perforations, yes?
I think that's a question is with the perforations or not, depending on the facer.
Right. And if we go to the top of the email chain, then we can see Dan Ball writes back on the 5th of September, same day, saying, this is to you, we test the facing separately, and we have a Class 0 summary report. So under Part B, we can then say the product is Class 0. Low risk, however, it doesn't cover. That requires the product is placed on the market to be tested. So only by claiming it from the facer can we satisfy Part B, but not the Scottish regs. Yes, it's the same issue as the Euro class, really. Pentane and the perforations. The only product in the KIL range that can be Class 0 as a product as placed on the market is the Ecotherm Pro Protect, uses a pure foil unperforated. Now, I'll just pause there for a moment. Pentane and the perforations is a reference to the pentane gases being released. Is this right? Pentane gases being released through the perforations during the test and causing a fail?
That's correct.
Right. Were you actually aware that the only one product in Kingspan's entire range, that only one product in the range could achieve Class 0, and that was Ecotherm Pro Protect?
I was by this email.
Right. And all the rest could not achieve Class 0?
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, continuing with Dan Ball's email, he goes on to say this. It is something that needs some attention if we wish to continue with stating Class 0 as claiming Class 0 from the facing is somewhat misleading. Now, just pausing there, that's right, isn't it? He's correct.
Oh, yeah, I would agree.
You would. Or could leave us open to unwanted attention. If we are claiming Class 0 to be Part B, but not stating low risk in accordance with the Scottish regs, they could put 2 and 2 together and realise that the class 0 has been obtained from just testing the facing, which is technically allowed. But when I've spoken with fire engineers in the past, like Franz Paps, they've agreed that technically you can claim it like that, but they always advise that the product should be tested as a complete product. Of course they would, as they will always err on the side of caution. So whether we can, want to state class 0, when as a finished product we will only have reports stating that they are class 1, I don't know how we want to proceed there, as we don't have a report that states class 0 on the finished product. When I tested core, we didn't even get class 1. This time both K5 and K15 got class 1, but they were a fair way off getting a total index of less than 12, with no individual result over 6. We were over 12 after 3 burns, and there were a total of 5 in the test. Did it not, at least by that stage, strike you as odd that you could claim class 0 in England by the reason of a pass of the test to the foil facer alone, but not in Scotland, where the test requires the composite to pass?
Well, there was a clear difference in the definition. So I don't know how the definitions were derived, but for in ADB it was allowable to test the surface, but in at the Scottish Technical Book it wasn't.
Did you not stop to ask yourself, now that this has been made, this distinction has been made crystal clear to you, at this point by Dan Ball, and ask yourself the question, why is it that the guidance for England and Wales allows this literal interpretation, which you were apparently keen on, and Scotland doesn't? Did you ask yourself that question?
I may have asked myself it, but I wouldn't have known or had to go back finding out how the differences had occurred. It was just what was in the regulations.
Well, did you know at the time of any policy differences as between England and Scotland in this respect?
No, policy difference, no.
And there's no difference, is there, between how fires behave on products south of the Scottish border from how they behave north of the Scottish border, is there?
No.
And so if the difference was a real difference as opposed to an apparent difference, you would have wanted to know what that difference was based on.
Possibly, yes.
And the reality is, isn't it, Mr. Pargeter, that the difference that you claim to have seen between the English and the Scottish test requirements was entirely illusory. It wasn't a real difference. It was just an argument of semantics based on your literal reading of approved document B.
That's correct. It was different interpretation,
Yeah.
different statement.
And that's why Dan Ball felt he had to give the warning that people might put 2 and 2 together and worked out what you'd done.
Well, I think it was clear that we tested it to the English and Welsh regulations.
In the way that you interpreted them,
Yes.
or purported to. Was it after this email that the decision was made to remove low risk from K15's marketing literature, so far as it was directed at the Scottish market?
I can't remember exactly when we changed it.
Do you know who made the decision that low risk should no longer be claimed for K15?
Ultimately, I did.
And you did that, am I right, because it would have been completely unopen to you on the basis of the wording?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ask yourself how come, up to that point, K15 had been described as low risk?
It was the core, actually, in the literature that was being claimed as low risk, but it was on the understanding that there was some previous test evidence to have claimed it.
Who made the decision that even though you were going to withdraw the description of low risk for for the Scottish market. Nonetheless, you would continue to claim Class 0 for K15 in the English and Welsh markets.
I did.
And that decision was taken in the face of Exover's advice that the product should be contested as a complete product, and that was the conservative way to do it, and that any other approach was less than ideal.
It was based on my interpretation of ADB.
So you took a conscious risk to market Class 0 in a way that was riskier and put people's great lives at greater risk than if you had told them exactly what you'd done.
I don't think it put people's lives at greater risk, but I do concede we could have made it clearer.
You don't think it put people's great lives at risk, but Mr. Pargeter, it isn't for you as the manufacturer to decide that question, is it? That's why we have a testing regime.
I just stuck with that interpretation of ADB.
Because if the logic of your thinking was carried to its conclusion, you would think to yourself, well, I think that this is perfectly safe, and therefore the testing regime simply doesn't matter. And that can't be right, can it?
No, that's not right.
No. Were you aware at the time that the industry, by which I really mean some parts of the UK construction industry, not all, often confuse Class 0 with limited combustibility?
I wasn't, no.
You weren't?
No.
Were you aware that in the past the phrase limited combustibility had been used even in respect of K15?
At the time, no.
Were you aware of thinking in some parts of the UK construction industry that Class 0 simply meant that it was safe above 18 metres?
No.
Can we look at your second witness statement, please, at page 10? Come back to that, and let's look at paragraph 3.18. I said I would come back to it. I'm now doing that. And at the end of that paragraph there, you say, in order to reflect these changes in what part of the product had been tested, Kingspan updated the K15 product literature in October 2017 to define its Class 0 status as, quotes, achieves Class 0 as defined in approved document B in England and Wales. Is that a reference to the wording that Reshma Ruderman put together in the email chain we looked at earlier?
Yes, I think it is.
Effectively removing the reference to the core, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And let's look at the documents at the time. KIN 408729. This is the Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board. I don't know whether you'd call it a data sheet or a piece of marketing literature, but the date is July 2016, as you can see from the top right-hand corner, and it's the 10th issue.
Yes.
So is this a document you approved, given that you were head of marketing at the time?
Yes.
And if you look at page 7, we can see here thermal properties in the top left-hand corner, and then, excuse me, a little further down on the left-hand side on page 7, fire performance, and it says Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board is Class 0 as defined by the building regulations. Now that was untrue, wasn't it?
No, because the FACER could achieve it, so that's in the building regulations as opposed to the technical handbook.
I see. So when you approved this document, was your thinking that this form of words, as defined by the building regulations, was supposed to communicate to the reader the following idea, namely that K15 as a composite product has failed Class 0, but the foil surface passed when tested separately, so K15 can be treated as having passed Class 0?
It was to show that into the building regulations and the interpretation of the England and Wales building regulations, it was allowable to claim Class O.
But if you were so confident in the argument that that is what approved document B meant, why not just say that K15 is class 0 because its foil facer has passed a BS 4766 and 7 test.
Yeah, I agree, and reflection, that's something we could have done.
Well, now, you say on reflection you could have done. At the time, surely you realised that you should have done.
It didn't occur to me at the time.
You say it didn't occur to you at the time. Mr. Pargeter, I simply can't accept that as a true answer, but for the reasons, and looking at the documents we've been through, which show that this language was intended to convey, but in reality to conceal the fact that contrary to what is said, the rain screen board is not class 0.
No, but that definition, it is.
So was your thinking at the time that somebody would pick up this document, read what's written there, and think to themselves, well, they only tested the foil facer to class 0, and that's good enough for me?
No, that they would see that it was, as defined by the building regs, class 0.
Given that you had no reason to think that the literal interpretation of approved document B was one shared widely in the industry or by your competitors, how could you possibly honestly have thought that anybody in the industry picking up this document and reading it would have adopted or even seen that literal interpretation?
I would have assumed that people in the industry understood there was a difference between the England regs and the Scottish regs, and it was under the England and Wales regs. That definition was.
The reality, Mr. Pargeter, let's face it, is that you intended deliberately to mislead your market, your customers, by these words, and indeed your competitors for what it's worth, but would have an argument if challenged and then see how it went.
No, I disagree.
It was a thoroughly disingenuous and opportunistic choice of words on your part to conceal the fact that K15 had never passed class 0 and never would as a composite product.
No, I disagree.
And you were seeking to perpetrate a fraud on the market and also to mislead customers into buying products that you knew had failed regulatory fire safety tests.
No, that's not the intention at all.
And you would do the same today, because you stand by that argument even now, it seems.
That's not. I don't agree.
Let's adopt a different angle and look at it the other way round. At its most generous to you on what you've told us, which was this was a literal reading you thought was fairly available to you. And tell me if I've misunderstood that. That's how you read it at the time.
Yes.
On a literal reading, it was fairly open to you to describe K15 as you have here.
Yes.
Would you accept that on that basis, even on that basis, you were exploiting a loophole in the guidance?
No, I think it was interpreting ADB. I don't think it was exploiting a loophole.
You were interpreting ADB, though, in accordance with a literal form of words rather than by reference to the underlying intentions in reality.
I'm interpreting it just by what it said.
But you'd seen a weakness in the drafting and were proposing to exploit it.
No, I don't think so. I think it was, like I say, it was the interpretation of ADB.
And that's why you were forced to remove the references to the product being low risk in Scotland, but then did nothing to inform industry in England and Wales that the classification class 0 couldn't be maintained because of that literal reading.
But it could be maintained because of that literal reading.
Let's look at your second statement. Before I do, can I just ask you this? In Scotland, is it right that it was only after the Grenfell Tower fire in June 2017 that you expressly then made the product literature state that the K15 was medium risk in Scotland?
I can't remember exactly when it was, but we'd had a few, I think, customers ask, well, what is the rating if it's not low risk?
Right.
So we took the decision to make that clearer.
Right. Well, let's just look at what you say about that. Your second statement, please, at page 30. And I'd like to look at paragraph 4.41, subparagraph C, about a third of the way down that page. And you say there, the K15 product literature was further amended in the 11th issue, dated October 2017, to state, Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board achieves Class 0 rating, as defined by approved document B in England and Wales, and technical booklet E in Northern Ireland. It also achieves medium risk, as defined in the technical handbook in Scotland. And then you say, this wording now makes clear that K15 achieves a medium risk rating in Scotland and removes all ambiguity. Now, do you accept that that wording that you've set out there on the page was as misleading as the wording in the July 2016 version of the K15 product literature?
No, I don't. It's not misleading.
This is, of course, October 2017, after the Grenfell Tower fire. Why not simply put out a clear, correct, and unambiguous description of the test results for this product?
Because that was an interpretation of ADB.
Why did you wait 15 months before getting round to stating what the true level was in Scotland, medium, but in the intervening 15 months, so July 2016 to October 2017, said nothing about it, but simply left Class 0 in?
I think it was in response to customer queries about what was the rating in Scotland then, so we responded to that.
Did it not occur to you at the time that by removing the reference to low risk in Scotland but leaving the reference to Class 0 in England and Wales, Scottish buyers might think that because it had Class 0 in England and Wales, it was therefore low risk in Scotland?
No, it didn't.
But given the intended... Well, let me ask you. I've tried it before, I'll try it again. You didn't see any intention for there to be any... Let me try it again. Did you see any intention for there to be any non-equivalence between Scotland and England? Did you think that the lack of equivalence you perceived in the wording was deliberate?
Well, it must have been. Why was it differently worded?
But you didn't know of any rational reason why that should be the case?
I didn't know why they were developed into different definitions. No.
So far as you were concerned, this was an accident of drafting, without any rational or empirical explanation.
I wouldn't say it was an accident. I just wasn't aware of why the drafting had gone the way it was.
Exactly, and that's a question you never thought to ask yourself or anybody else.
That's correct.
Yes, and on that basis alone, you let Scottish buyers think that although there was no specific specific classification of low risk in Scotland, nonetheless, because it was Class 0 in England, it could be treated as low risk in Scotland.
Not deliberately.
Well, you say not deliberately. Why not then redesignate it as medium risk in Scotland straight away?
Yeah, we should have done that.
But why didn't you?
It didn't think about it. It didn't occur to us. We just took the low risk rating off. But in hindsight, we should have put that it was medium risk.
The reality is obvious, isn't it, Mr. Pargeter? That you had no way out, even a tenable argument on the narrow wording in Scotland, which is why you were forced to remove the reference to low risk. But because you saw this literal reading in England, you retained the Class 0. And you must have realised, surely, that that would mislead Scottish buyers into thinking that although nothing was said about low risk in Scotland, because it was Class 0 in England, that would be all right in Scotland.
No, I didn't think that.
You didn't. But not to think that, do you accept? If you didn't think that at the time, then that was, at the very minimum, a casual and reckless approach to fire safety regulation.
No, I don't think it was casual or reckless.
Now, I've asked you some questions about your perception at the time of a common misconception in the industry that Class 0 meant limited combustibility or safe above 18 metres, and you've never heard of that. Can I just ask you to look at something? KIN 30200841, please. This is an email chain from November 2016. And you're on it, just so you're clear. And I want to start at page 6, please, because on page 6 we can see a query from Page Park Architects in Glasgow. So we're now in Scotland, and we're now in October 2016. And it's from Joanne Hemmings to Travis Hunter. And she asks him, and I don't think we need to know who he is particularly or what project it is other than it's in Scotland. And she says, "Hi Travis, as discussed, please see note below from the building control officer." And then she sets out the note about suitable barriers. "We have only allowed for cavity barriers every 20 metres, as the Kingspan K15 has a Class 0 fire rating. We don't want to go up to cavity barriers every 10 metres if possible. Can you please comment? We will also need to add a cavity barrier detail around the windows and doors, etc., etc." So she's talking here about about insulation within a cavity, it seems. And then if we go up the email chain, we can see how this evolves. Travis Hunter responds on bottom of page 5 with table 13, and that's the relevance of the classification class 0 of insulation within a cavity. And Travis Hunter says, just above the end of page 5, with Cooltherm K15 being class 0 and Euro class C, it would appear to fall into the max 20 metre category. Now don't forget, this is in Scotland, but they're looking at class 0 there. And if you go up the page a little bit further, up the pages a little bit further, to page 2, we see this email coming in to Kingspan, and at the bottom there, and up the page further, you are then engaged by Aaron Chalmers, 2nd of November 2016 at 15:01, and he writes to you and says, "Hi Adrian, can you help on this? You're probably aware of this issue as it's been ongoing for a while, but basically through a loophole, note the word, we claim K15 is class 0 in line with the ADB by just testing the facing. However, Scotland's technical handbook is worded better in the sense that the entire product must be tested to achieve class 0 to subsequently be designated as low risk." So we have two options. One, we know it's not low risk. Shall we be honest and say it's medium risk, and therefore cavity barriers will need to be every 10 metres and not every 20 metres? Bearing in mind this could then damage us on future jobs, as Extratherm has a low-risk board and therefore huge USB over K15. USB means ultimate selling point. 2, this is the second of his options, we blag it, send them our facing test, and confirm that in line with ADB it's class 0, and kind of ignore her direct question about being low risk, and hope their building control officer interprets this to class 0/low risk. And we can see your response in the next email up. If we turn to page 1. Bottom of the page, you to Aaron Chalmers, same day, a few minutes later, 20 minutes later to be precise. "Hi Aaron, tricky one. As class 0 will no longer be recognised by BBA, etc., is there any other test method that can be used to prove low risk, quotes, close quotes?" What was tricky about a choice between being honest and blagging it, Mr. Pargeter?
That isn't tricky. It's the fact that the BBA are no longer recognising the British standard tests and are only going to be referencing the Euro class tests. And then what I was trying to find out was what else is there to give us a low risk in terms of the Euro class standard?
Well, why not just go for option 1? Be honest. What was wrong with that?
Nothing was wrong with that.
Well, why not tell him?
I just wanted to find out what the other options were, if Class O is no longer going to be, or the British standards were no longer going to be referencing the BBA.
You wanted to find out what the other options were. You were given a choice between telling the truth and blagging it. I can translate blagging for you if you want me to. Blagging means falsifying or lying about it. You're given a choice by Aaron Chalmers, and instead of telling him what the obvious answer was, you tell us you wanted to find out what the other options were.
Yeah, it wasn't a choice between blagging it. Obviously, we would tell them we'd go for the honest route, but we need to work out what other avenues there are if there's no longer going to be Class O in our BBA certificate.
Well, forgive me, you're given a one choice of two routes, being honest and blagging it. Your response isn't to say to him, well, you've got to be honest, clearly now. This is clearly the time we've got to come clean. You ask him, what are the other choices? How could that possibly be a straight way of dealing with this question?
Well, blagging it was not an option, and possibly I should have made that clearer. But we need to see what other options there are as well.
In fact, blagging it was, as described, and he then goes on to explain precisely what that involved, was exactly the policy that you were hoping to pursue, wasn't it?
No.
And that's precisely why you felt able to produce the product literature for July 2016 we've seen, with the statement it has in it. Ignore the question about being low risk, which I put to you then, and hope the building control officer interprets it to Class 0. That was the policy.
No, it wasn't. I disagree.
You don't. But your response, you see, is also telling, isn't it? Because you come back, you don't say to him, well, we can't blag it, and you've got to say it's not low risk and be honest. You ask for other options. Now, is that a responsible and honest approach of the head of technical and marketing?
I should have clarified the fact that the option of blagging it isn't an option. I agree.
But we don't see that, you see. You don't entertain this request, this very clear exposition of your choices. You just tell him it's a tricky one and look for other options. I've got to suggest to you that this really identifies exactly what was going on, that you had adopted a disingenuous and opportunistic reading of ADB that you claim was open to you. I can argue about that. You've been told by a fire engineer that was not a conservative or ideal reading, had decided to adopt it, had put out marketing literature, and now that the net was closing because somebody in Scotland had actually asked the right question, you were faced with a tricky one. That's what was happening, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't. I think we needed to understand what the low-risk option was with Euroclass and not any longer on the British standard classifications that they were being removed.
Well, let's see how Aaron Chalmers responds in light of that answer. We go scrolling up, please, to page one higher up. Aaron Chalmers comes back to you 5 minutes later and says, I know our only option to legitimately claim low risk is to get a Euro Class B on K15 or somehow get Class 0 on the product as a whole, which ideally is what we should be doing anyway. Neither seems like a reasonable possibility ATM. Now, it's right, isn't it, that ideally you should have been getting Class 0 on the product as a whole, but weren't. That's clear, isn't it? And that's what Franz Pappert advised.
In an ideal world, yes, I'd agree with that.
Ideally, I would suggest, in a compliant world, in a world where you wanted your products to comply.
No, we're still compliant, but...
Right. And it's clear from this, isn't it, that your staff at Kingspan, Mr. Chalmers, knows exactly what you ought to be doing in terms of claiming Class 0, but you weren't doing it, and that was because you were persisting with your course of exploiting what you perceived, what he described, as a loophole in ADB.
That's his view, yes.
What kind of business, what kind of department were you running, Mr. Pargeter?
I'd like to think a good, well-run department.
The department that seizes on an opportunistic reading of fire safety legislation and exploits it for profit is how some people would see it. How do you respond to those people?
I don't see it like that at all.
Let's go to the top of the chain. This is an email that you send on to Gwyn Davis, the Technical Processing Director, and Tony Scott and Lindsay Hobbs. Guys, just passing on difficulties we're getting in Scotland. we will soon have to declare a medium risk for K15 unless we can get Euro Class B on this product. This will hurt us and allow Extratherm in with their low-risk product. I was hoping K115 would give us a chance to tackle this, but the hope of this has faded with subsequent testing. Why were you not declaring a medium risk in Scotland already, given the knowledge that you had in relation to the performance of K15 in the testing? November 2016.
Because we just removed the low risk, and I agree we should have been clearer with that. It was medium risk.
Yeah, and at this point, of course, you're alive to the fact that you would soon have to do that.
Yes, to make it clearer for people. Agreed.
And why hadn't you done it already? That's my question.
It just hadn't occurred. My priority was to make sure it wasn't described as low risk.
Right. Is it right? Am I right to take from this email that when you say we will soon have to declare a medium risk for K15, you realised that for every day you went by, there was a risk?
Yes, potentially, yes.
Yes. Well, in the end, of course, we know, as we've seen, that you don't actually declare medium risk for K15 until October 2017, so that's 11 months later. What accounts for the delay?
I can't explain the delay.
Were you simply keeping quiet in order to allow sales to continue, as industry had not expressly been told that the classification of the product had changed?
No, that wasn't the intention.
Did you not consider that your actions in delaying this change in classification extremely dangerous or risky?
No, I didn't.
Can you explain why not?
Because if it wasn't low risk, then the difference between being medium or high risk was that there was no difference. So it was only if it was low risk would it be put into buildings which would need or have the lower barrier content. So if it wasn't low risk, then it couldn't be used in that. That was the logic at the time.
Do you know how this particular problem that had arisen in Scotland was resolved?
Was resolved?
Yes.
No, sorry, no.
What impression in the end did the owner of the building in Scotland who was asking the question about the cavity barriers, what did they end up with about whether K15 really was Class 0 or not?
I can't recall.
Did it occur to you that unless they were told that K15 was not Class 0 as a composite product and was not low risk as a composite product, they would be misled into thinking that it was and would therefore apply K15 in a dangerous location, not in accordance with ADB?
No, it didn't.
So it didn't occur to you that people were making decisions about the position of, for example, cavity barriers, as we've seen, based on the false advice that Kingspan was giving?
It didn't occur to me, no.
And is it really right that you never stopped and thought about what effect your approach might have on the safety of those in buildings on which K15 was to be applied, where a Class 0 certification or low-risk classification mattered?
It didn't. I just, as it wasn't designated as low risk, I thought that would cover us.
I'm bound to suggest to you, Mr. Pargeter, that your approach to this issue was not only dishonest, but displayed a reckless disregard for human life and safety. Do you accept that?
No, I disagree.
We don't see any evidence that you advised Page Park in Scotland that K15 was medium risk. Can we take it that you didn't?
No, I don't recall what the outcome of that was.
Let's look at a different topic. I want to ask you about BCA Technical Guidance Note 18 and Kingspan's route to compliance document, to which we're now going to return. It's right, just going back in time a couple of years, that not long after the July 2014 test, you were promoted to head of marketing in November of that year. And we can see what that role entailed. Can we go to your second statement, please, at page 3, and look at paragraph 2.2c? And you explain there that you were promoted to head of marketing, and you explain in the fourth line down that the role included the design and production of all marketing materials such as product brochures and newsletters. The team was also responsible for the development of technical research products and Kingspan's fire safety compliance campaign regarding the use of K15 in rain screen specifications. K15 is primarily marketed via literature, technical bulletins and associated professional development presentations to architects and specifiers. Now, you've told us before that you were responsible, essentially, for the creation of Kingspan's routes to compliance documents, or document, as part of the fire safety campaign that you created. I just want to ask you about the way in which K15 was marketed from the time you started in November 2014. So we're going back a little bit in time, I'm afraid. Can we go over the page to paragraph 4.2 of this same statement, please? And I say it's over the page, it's page 12. And you say at the bottom of page 12, by the time I was appointed as head of marketing in November 2014, Kingspan's strategy was primarily to try and increase and expand the safe use of K15 as part of compliance systems and external cladding systems, including, do we have that on the screen? Including for buildings with a floor over 18 metres. As of November 2014, what percentage of the sales of K15 were for use on buildings over 18 metres, even roughly? Can you remember?
No, I think it's difficult to break that down because of the route to market.
Right. Was it a substantial percentage of sales, or was it an insubstantial percentage of sales? Even roughly give us an idea.
I think by 2014 it was quite a substantial.
Right. And how did you seek to expand the use of K15 in the over 18 market, over 18 metre market?
How do we seek to expand?
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's your word. You say the strategy was primarily to try and increase and expand the safe use of K15. How did you seek to expand the use of K15 over 18 metres?
By the routes to compliance campaign, so people were aware of the routes to compliance and the promotion of that route, the BCA guidance.
Right. Does that mean desktops?
Yes.
Right. Now, if we look at the next paragraph, Kingspan's strategy as to how to achieve such increase and expansion was helped by the issuance of the BCA Technical Guidance, Note 18, Use of Combustible Cladding Materials on Residential Buildings in June 2014. And then you explain that a little bit more in paragraph 4.4. And just for everyone's benefit, the BCA released a technical guidance note called Technical Guidance Note 18 in June 2014, which gives 3 routes to compliance, doesn't it? For combustible materials over 18 metres. Either you use non-combustible materials, or you, if you're using combustible materials, a build-up by being tested under a system test under BS 8414, or thirdly, a desktop analysis. Those are the 3, weren't they?
Correct.
Yeah. And I think you've identified this, but the technical guidance note helped your strategy because it expanded the kinds of rain screen cladding systems into which you could sell K15 by the extrapolation analysis done by a proper desktop.
Correct.
Right. Now, let's go to page 77 of this statement, paragraph 8.8. In the middle of the page there, you are asked about your awareness of the content of BCA's Technical Guidance Note 18, issue 0 or issue 1, issued in June 2014 and 15 respectively. And your answer, as you can see, is I was not aware of the content of BCA TGN 18 issue 0 or 1 prior to its publication, and I have no knowledge of any other employee or agent of Kingspan having any such prior knowledge. Can we look, in the light of that evidence, to BRE 404073, please? This is an email, and at the top of the chain, it's a longish chain, it's in July 15, and we can see here Ivor Meredith writing to the BRE, Phil Clark, Stephen Howard and Debbie Smith, Dr. Debbie Smith. And if you look at the third paragraph down, he says this: "We are slowly educating the NHBC and worked with them and the BCA to produce BCA Technical Note 18. The June issue of this document should be available through the BCA website, that promotes BS 8414 and assessments relating to BR 135. Kingspan foresee a need for a massive amount of assessments over the next 12 months. However, this project is a little tricky as it's fallen foul of their policy change and they've moved the goalposts and are refusing to sign it off without a revised assessment of the facade, even though they originally sanctioned the construction. Kingspan, incidentally, were not contractually involved and thus was only made aware of the job when it became an issue." Now, I should have pointed out to you that this is in the context of a particular project. It's the Kew Bridge West project. So that's what the last part of that paragraph is referring to. But I want to ask you about the first part of that paragraph, where he says we're slowly educating the NHBC. Were you aware of that at the time?
I don't recall that, no.
Were you not aware that members of the NHBC were also members of the BCA?
I knew NHBC were members of the BCA, yes.
And was it the case that both NHBC and Kingspan were keen to expand the routes to compliance?
Yes, I would think so, yes.
Did Tony Millichap not mention this fact to you when he left in May 2015, just 2 months before this?
The fact that we were involved...
Yes. The fact that Kingspan had been educating the NHBC slowly and working with them and the BCA to produce BCA Technical Note 18.
I don't recall.
Right. Let's look at NHB 50977. I'd like to ask you about a meeting that took place in March 2015 with the NHBC. This is 2 months or so before Mr. Millichap left Kingspan's employment. And we can see that you are not there. But from Kingspan we have Richard Burnley, MD, Managing Director, Tony Millichap and Ivor Meredith. And we can see the agreed actions from that March meeting. And if you look at action number 3 from the meeting, it says NHBC to discuss widening / amending scope of options for demonstrating compliance stated in BCA guidance note. Were you aware that that was an action note agreed with the NHBC at the meeting?
I don't recall seeing that at the time.
Right. Now, this is March 2015, so you're head of marketing, but you haven't yet taken on the head of technical role. You took that on from Tony Millichap.
Yes.
So does that explain why he didn't report this to you at that time?
Possibly, or I don't recall it.
Right. Did Richard Burnley have a conversation with you at this time about meeting NHBC generally?
I think I was aware that had a meeting with NHBC, but with looking at the chronologies with our discussions with NHBC, I'm not sure exactly when I would have known that, so I'm not sure I would have known about that 5th of March meeting.
And when you...
Prior.
I'm so sorry. Did you want to finish your answer?
I was going to say prior to looking at documents for the inquiry.
When you took over the job of head of technical and conjoined it with the head of marketing, did Mr. Millichap, on his departure, brief you about his meetings that he had had earlier that year with the NHBC?
I don't recall.
You don't recall?
No.
You don't recall one way or the other, or you don't recall it happening?
I don't recall it happening.
Did Mr. Millichap hand you his file when he left?
There was some paperwork, but I don't remember NHBC notes in that file.
Right. When Mr. Millichap left, did he give you access to his files, whether they were paper form or electronic files, so that you could carry on where he had left off in the role of head of technical?
Yeah, I think there was some paper files, I think. that were in the office. But I can't recall exactly what was in them now.
All right. Did you read them? Did you take the trouble to go through his file and pick out what you needed to continue with the job?
I think probably yes, but I can't recall it. But
Do you recall
probably
seeing
yes.
this document at the time?
No, I don't.
Now let's go back to the routes to compliance technical document. Can we go to KIN 302084, please? This is your second statement, page 23, please. I'd like to go to that. And I'd like to go to paragraph 4.21 on that page at the bottom. And you say, my role in preparing the technical content of this first issue of this bulletin was limited as by the time I took over as head of technical in May 2015. Most of the drafting and compilation of relevant test data had already been completed by Ivor Meredith, technical project manager, and Tony Millerchap, head of technical. Once my role expanded to include head of technical, I worked with the team to ensure the document reflected the guidance provided in BCA TGN 18 and also became involved in reviewing the drafts of the route to compliance document. Now, the last part of this paragraph is something we've been through a little bit earlier in your evidence on signing off the drafts. So let's just take it on a bit by reference to the contemporaneous material. Can we go to KIN 406464, please? This is an email you sent to Kathy Barlow at the PR firm Smith & Goodfellow on the 6th of May 2015, where you attach a draft of the document. And we can see you say at the top of the page, we've now put together a brief of our thoughts on a mini-campaign to cover the routes to compliance for K15, addressing the fire issues as previously discussed. We agree with your view below regarding the approach. The main focus is on producing the technical bulletin, and we've attempted a basic structure and mind-dumped our thoughts around what it needs to say, pages 4 to 6. Now, you can see that what's attached to your email to Kathy Barlow is a document called Routes to Compliance for High-Rise V2 PDF. That's the second of the attachments up there, isn't it?
Yes.
And in fact, that document, let's just put it in front of you, KIN 408257 is the draft. And I'm saying that. Can you confirm that? That's the first page of it.
Yes.
And we can scroll. We can scroll down to the second and third pages just to confirm that that's what you sent Kathy Barlow in that email on the 6th of May 2015. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Now, it's not right to say, is it, therefore, that the document was already written because you're sending a draft to Smith & Goodfellow.
I think the information was there, and we were looking to Smith & Goodfellow to compile it all.
Right. And you're agreeing the view regarding the approach. If we look at the bottom of the email chain, if we can just go back to that we can see that there's an earlier correspondence. But if you go back to page 2 in that email run, you can see that you send her on the 1st of May something called the NHBC communication regarding combustible insulation above 18 metres. Was that... what was that document?
I think it may have been their technical advice document.
What, issue 0 from June 2014?
Possibly.
Right. Now, it's right, isn't it, that Smith & Goodfellow's advice was to support the NHBC in your marketing material, wasn't it?
Did it say that?
Well, let me show you. Let me show you what she says at the bottom of page 1. She sends an email to you on the 5th of May in response to yours, and she says, "This is not as bad as I feared, and I think the way forward is to send out a communication, and then in bold, in support of what the NHBC is saying. The letter talks about limited combustibility, not non-combustible, and it reinforces the use of 8414 and of a fire engineering approach."
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So was the bulletin that you then produced as part of a wider campaign designed to adopt the BCA routes to compliance and thereby partner with the NHBC on widening the scope of K15?
I wouldn't say it was to partner with them, but it was to support that BCA document.
Right. If we can go to the final version of the Routes to Compliance document then, at KIN 403148, which we've seen before and was released in August 2015, I just want to take you to page 3 in it. And there, it refers to common misconceptions. It starts by giving an introduction about this document, and it says, in the second paragraph, however, choosing the best route to compliance with fire safety regulatory requirements in Great Britain necessitates a clear understanding of the complexities and the common misconceptions that surround the use of insulation in these constructions. The route that best serves the purpose of the building and the needs of stakeholders while producing a well-balanced result may not always be the most obvious option. What were the common misconceptions that you're referring to here?
I think that there was a view that it was generally misunderstood the options of the BCA guidance, so we were looking to clarify that from our perspective.
When you say you were looking to clarify the misconceptions about the BCA guidance, do you really mean you were looking to support the expansion of the application of the 8414 test by use of the desktops?
Yes, I think that would be.
Yes. And let's look at page 5 of the bulletin, the Routes to Compliance document. In the first paragraph on page 5, we can see that there is, as part of a long analysis of the BCA material, you say, with the aim of addressing common misconceptions as regards to the use of combustible materials within the facade system of residential buildings containing a story 18 metres or greater above ground level, Industry Group BCA issued its Technical Guidance Note 18, Use of Combustible Cladding Materials on Residential Buildings, Issue 1, June 2015. You see that?
Yes.
And then it goes on to explain, and I'm summarising, I hope accurately, the fact that because of the number of possible facade build-ups, you can't have fire test data for every single one, and you need desktops as a result to expand the application. I've summarised that probably rather crudely, but that's the effect of what
that's the essence.
said. Yes. And if you go to page 6, in the middle of the page there's a reference to linear route. And it says, although Kingspan Cool Therm K15 rain screen board and its rigid thermoset insulation core are Class 0, as defined by the building regulations, the linear route to compliance is not open. Now, can you explain why Class 0 is mentioned there at all?
No, not really. I think the limited combustibility is not open. It's not limited combustibility, therefore it's not open from the linear route. But I think it was just to reiterate that it was Class O, but it's not. Yeah, so it's not part of the linear route. So,
well, right. Let's just take it in stages. Again, you told us before that this document was signed off by you on the 24th of July 2015 before sending it to Richard Bromwich and Richard Burnley. So you would have read it with care, and I put that to you earlier.
yes.
Can I assume that you read this page with care, particularly under linear route?
I would like to think so.
Yes. So never mind the point about Class 0 as defined by the building regulations. We've been through that. I'm not going to ask you about that again. My question is, why are you referring to Class 0 here at all when Class 0 has got nothing to do with the linear route to compliance?
I can't really explain. It was part of the drafting. I think it's correct, but what's its relevance? I can't explain.
Well, it's not actually even correct, is it? Because it gives the impression that Class Naught might have something to do with the linear route to compliance. And I have to suggest to you that this was in there because you knew that many people in the industry thought that Class Naught was a passport to use above 18 metres.
I wasn't aware of that at that time.
And the reason why Class Naught is referred to at all is to continue to make use of that perception. It's part of a positive message, isn't it?
No, well, this kind of dispels that message in a way, so I don't think there was an intention to keep referring to Class O so that it is misunderstood as being of limited combustibility.
So I ask the question again, what is the point of referring to Class Naught here at all?
Looking at that now, I think it must be to clear that potential up.
Sorry, I don't
To
think
clear that potential up between Class O and limited combustibility.
don't understand that, I'm afraid. What potential up? Clear what potential up?
That there was a misconception between Class O and limited combustibility.
But you're perpetuating the misperception by continuing to refer to Class Naught where it's exactly not wanted, aren't you?
No, I mean we're clearly defining it as not. So
Well, when you read this document with care, you must have asked yourself, well, why are we referring to Class Naught here under the linear route? Didn't you?
I didn't. No.
And why not simply say K15 is not a product of limited combustibility and therefore can't meet the requirements of Part B2 of the building regulations unless it's part of a successful 8414 test or part of a desktop? Why not just say that?
We could have said that.
But you didn't and chose to
No.
introduce the concept of Class Naught, and I'm suggesting a rational reason for that, which was that you saw that as a selling point.
Potentially.
Is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. You haven't finished with this document, I take it, but
No,
but,
certainly
it's
not.
a good point.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Pargeter, we'll have another short break at this point. We'll come back at 20 to 4, please. And usual business, don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room, please.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Right, 20 to 4, please. Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Pargeter to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Pargeter.
Yes.
Right, ready to carry on? Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Bennett?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Pargeter, I'd like to ask you about some case studies in this bulletin. So we're going to stay with the same document. Can we go to page 8, please? This is the section of this document entitled Case Studies. I'm so sorry, I should perhaps have given the reference. It's KIN 403148. Thank you. And here we have case studies. And the first of those is a building called, a project called New Pendleton in Salford, residential tower blocks. You see that? It says in the first paragraph, 9 1970s residential blocks in central Salford are being given a new lease of life, with both the inside and out being revitalised thanks to a major retrofit scheme, which incorporates premium performance, Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board in the overcladding of external walls. And in the third paragraph down, it says the tired brick facades of the mid and high-level apartment blocks are being replaced by modern aluminium rain screen cladding. The first tower, the 12-storey white beam, was completed in July and is soon to be followed by the 23-storey spruce. And if we can go to page 9, we can see a full picture of the building, one of the buildings. And the cladding there is, in fact, as we can see later, Reynobond ACM, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were you aware that there were different versions of Reynobond ACM panels?
No, not at that time.
Were you aware if the Reynobond on the Pendleton buildings had a PE core or whether it was an FR core, fire retardant?
I don't recall.
Did you ask anybody?
No, I don't think so.
Right. Did you make any inquiries at all about this cladding rain screen product before it was featured in your marketing material?
No, I think we would have we'd have contacted the owners of the building and asked if we could do a case study on it, and that would have been done through our agent Smith and Goodfellow.
Yes, and if we can pursue that a little bit, can we go to KIN 402729, please? This is an email from Simco. Sorry, I should show you the middle email on page 1. It is an email from Ben Bishop at Simco to Dan Ball about the fire certificate, and this is in the context of a rather longer email chain about this project. If we go to page 3, we can see that here is Ben Bishop's email to John Simmons at Simco the 23rd of July 2014. K15 fire certificate. John, please filled out Kingspan questionnaire below. And if you look at the fourth box down, you can see there's the cladding there. It's Reynobond 4 millimetres thick. I say the fourth box down, it's in the third box down, in fact, on that page. Can you see that?
Yes, yes.
And you can also see that the building is 33.09 metres high and is a block of flats. You see that a little bit lower down. 61 metres is Pendleton Spruce Court.
Yes.
And the other one is and Pendleton White Beam over the page is 33.09. So these are high rises. So at least, if not you, then certainly Kingspan would know that this was Reynobond 4 millimetres going in on these buildings over 18 metres. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
That,
and I accept that you don't see whether that's PE core or not. I accept that. But just to show you that evidence. And then if we go to KIN 402731, KIN 403-2731. This is a letter from Kingspan to Simcoe, dated the 14th of August 2014, written by Dan Ball to Simcoe. We know it's Dan Ball from page 2. Have you seen this letter before?
I don't recall it.
I mean, you were Dan Ball's line manager at this point, weren't you? August 2014.
No, I wasn't.
You weren't. Right?
No, it would have been from May 2015.
Right. Okay. Let's see how we go with it then. Maybe you can't help me with it. But the first section of the letter reads, "Dear Graham, re Pendleton Spruce Court, Coulthurn K15. In reference to our telecon of 13th of August 2014 regarding use of Coulthurn K15 in Pendleton Spruce Court in a facade that has a habitable space of 18 metres or more above ground level, we can confirm, from checking through the build-up listed in the query form attached separately, Kingspan Insulation Limited are happy that the build-up you propose is suitable to include K15. And then it goes on, Kingspan Insulation Limited have a comprehensive bank of third-party accreditation, LABC registered details, and successful testing to both BS8414 Part 1 and 2. As discussed, documentation relating to BS8414 Part 2 is with the testing facility. And then halfway down that paragraph, he says, in order for things to progress, Kingspan Insulation Limited would like for you to take this letter as confirmation that Coulthurn K15 has been specified correctly and that the facade build-ups of this project follow suit with the requirements of approved document B's alternative compliance route, and therefore Kingspan Insulation Limited's test regime carried out at the BRE. This letter is a straightforward and clear confirmation, I would suggest, of correct specification and compliance of the particular external facade build-up by Kingspan, isn't it?
It appears that way, yes.
It's right, isn't it, that the K15, which was actually going to go into the structure at Pendleton Spruce Court, had not, in fact, been successfully tested under BS8414.
Yes, that's correct.
And therefore this letter was misleading.
I would agree.
Now, this query form was completed, was sent to Kingspan in July 2014, as we've seen, and this letter is August 2014. So this is just about a year before the routes to compliance document was released, wasn't it, as a matter of chronology?
Yes.
Yeah. And as we've seen, this project, certainly Pendleton Spruce, was clad in Rayno Bond panels. Were you aware by 2015 that the Rayno Bond panels were actually ACM panels with a PE core?
No, I don't think so.
Do you dispute the fact that they were, in fact, ACM panels with a PE core?
No, I don't know what the core was on them.
Let's just have a look and see a document to see if it jogs your memory at all. MET 40563, please. MET 40563. This is an email run in April 18 from Graham Smith at Simcoe. And if we go to page 2 of the email chain, we can see that here is an email from Liam Harper on the 4th of May 2015 to Graham Byrne at Genius Facades, copied to Peter Froelich. So I just mentioned that for the moment for different reasons. And he says, ext, this is the subject, ext Rayno Bond PE switch from transparent core to black core, deadline 4th May 15. Peter, the only project that we have ongoing would be Pendleton. With this in mind, any material for the following blocks will need to be the transparent core as previous. Spruce Court, Hornbeam, Whitebeam, Thorn, Malice, Ruby, Red. Now, those are all Pendleton blocks, aren't they?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
All right. You don't know, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that you would have seen this email at the time, but looking at that, it appears, at least, that the Rainabond ACM panels going onto the Pendleton Spruce building were ones with a PE core. Are you telling us you weren't aware of that in 2015 when you used the Pendleton Spruce as your case study?
No.
Right. Did you not think it incumbent on you as head of marketing, and by August 2015 head of technical as well, to ensure that you were not promoting the use of K15 or other products with an ACM PE core?
No, it wouldn't have occurred not to me. I wasn't aware of the differences in the ACM options.
Right. Can we go back then to the Routes to Compliance document and look at another case study, page 10 now. This is KIN 403148, please. Page 10. Here is another case study, Brookhouse Rivers Apartments, Tottenham. And the first paragraph says, Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board has been installed as part of a multi-million-pound development in North London, providing 222 new affordable dwellings along with commercial space and a new primary school. And then just above the image of the facade on the same page, we can see some text which says, for the Rivers Apartments, Gypcraft installed a 60 and 100mm Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board with a steel frame infill system. To complete the building envelope, Gypcraft then fitted an aluminium composite material facade. Did you know that that project also featured K15 along with an ACM panel with a PE core?
No.
Or at least, if not a PE core, then an ACM facade, as you can see from that.
Yes, from the aluminium
Yeah.
composite.
Did you investigate what the composite material was with the aluminium?
No, I didn't.
And can we then go to KIN 407769, which is an email you sent to John Garbett about this building, Rivers Apartments, Tottenham, shortly after the Grenfell Tower fire on Sunday the 25th of June 2017, and you say, "Hi John, I've been reviewing the case studies on the website and Kathy has been providing some info." Is that Kathy Barlow from
Yes,
Fellow PR?
that would be,
Right.
yes.
See attached Word doc with all the above 18-metre case studies on. Thought you may need for meeting tomorrow. However, as I was going through this process, alarm bells rang when we established that Rivers Apartments is also called Brookhouse. Brookhouse is featured in the first edition of our Routes to Compliance Bulletin as a case study, but not the latest. Last week we were contacted via Jack Ditton, KIL Area Sales Manager, by the contractor Galliford Tri Partnerships in relation to this project, searching for answers. Apparently the client, Newlawn Housing Trust, Haringey Council, had contacted them and they're worried about the build-up and are looking to see if we have any desktop studies featuring this material. They have told Jack that they are the PE core panels. Recalling my conversations with Adam, apparently the original desktop study by Exova was for FR core. We planned to respond, in essence saying we couldn't do this, but I know they contacted Exova directly also. We were intrigued, but to see what Exova would say, not heard what their response is yet. I will dig out our actual response and more details on the DST, but we'll need to be tomorrow as it came from Adam. Was there in fact a desktop study by Exova? I ask because we've not been able to find it.
Oh, I was under the impression there was one for an FR core at
Right.
this point.
You were under that. What were you under the impression from?
I think with discussions with Adam, I think Adam had the direct
Right.
discussion.
Is that Adam Heath?
Yes.
So you had a discussion with Adam Heath about it, did you?
Yes.
Is one reason why you couldn't locate a desktop study, or perhaps we can't locate a desktop study in your disclosure, is that you wouldn't have prepared one for K15 with ACM panels with a PE core?
We wouldn't have done, no. They may have obtained one for themselves,
Right.
but unlikely with a PE core in our experience.
Unlikely with the PE core in your experience, why?
Because I think when we were looking at desktop studies, Exova would only do FR rated cores. They wouldn't do PE rated cores.
How far back in time was that experience of yours?
I think I can't recall exactly. I think I mentioned it in my witness statement.
Not further back than June 2014, clearly.
Don't think so.
No. And is that because, leave aside the industry, Kingspan's view was that K15 should never be used with an ACM PE core as the exterior rain screen?
I think we weren't particularly au fait with the difference in fire performance between a PE, an FR or an A2. Obviously, there was a difference, but I don't think we had an appreciation for what that difference might be.
Right.
But obviously the fire engineering community doing the desktop studies had got a better understanding.
Right. Were you aware of any desktop studies being done using it with a system or in relation to a system using K15 and ACM with a PE core after July 2016 when the NHBC amended their guidance to allow aluminium rain screen facades without a desktop?
I can't recall at the moment.
Let's look at a further example. Same document, page 14. This is a building called The Fold in Sidcup, Kent. And this is described as follows. Kingspan, a stunning new 6,500 square metre mixed-use development in Sidcup is the latest project to benefit from the outstanding thermal performance provided by Kingspan's insulation K15. See that?
Yes.
And the building is described as a 29-metre building, so it's a high-rise. Do you remember that this building came to your attention in April 2015 because of a complaint being raised on the wording of a draft press release, which also featured The Fold as a case study? Do you remember that?
I don't recall it.
All right, let's look at KIN 408262, please. This is a draft press release. Development sets the gold standard with Kingspan, 3rd of March 15. This is about the stunning new 6,500 square metre mixed-use development in Sidcup. You see that?
Yes.
And the text looks fairly familiar. Can we go to the email chain about this document at KIN 408261, please? The first email on that page there is from you to Tony Millerchap of the 28th of April 2015, where you say, guys, please see note below regarding a case study on K15 we're trying to get through. I think this needs to be looked at and responded to urgently. And if you run your eye down the page, you can see that you're responding to an email from Kathy Barlow the same day, when she's sending you the information about the complaint and asking you to get in touch with Juan Alberts from KDS Associates. And you can see that from the last email in the chain, and the project he's talking about is The Fold. And he says, and if you look at the bottom of the page 1, he was saying he wasn't happy with the draft because of this sentence, and over the top of page 2, you can see that there is an extract from the press release that we've just looked at, very briefly indeed, and there are two parts which are highlighted in yellow, and he's highlighted the part that says the product has also been successfully tested to both BS 8414-2002 and BS 8414-2005, and can meet the criteria within BR 135. You see that, and then there's another part you didn't like. And then underneath that extract, Sophie Fox at Smith Goodfellow, who's sending this email on, says, he said they've always used Kingspan products in the past, but they're having issues with K15 at the moment because the local building control have said that K15 was unacceptable for testing by the NHBC. Main crux of it is that because K15 ball burns, it didn't pass. Successfully tested, therefore, is wrong. You see that?
Yes.
And you then get that, and as I've shown you, send it to Mr. Millichap and Mr. Meredith. Do you know how this complaint was dealt with?
I can't recall, no, I don't.
Do you know what the outcome was in relation to the press release?
No, I don't recall.
If we go back to page 14 of the routes to compliance document at KIN 403148, we can see that Juan Alberts from KDS Associates is quoted in red there, you see. And we can see that the first offending sentence of which Mr. Alberts complained about passing 8414 does not feature, but the second one does. Fire performance does. So you responded to Mr. Alberts' complaint about representing Cooltherm K15 as having passed the relevant test. Was that because you had been, as it were, outed and didn't want to put something out that somebody who was related to this building knew was misleading and would complain about if you persisted?
No, I think we just complied with his request not to use that description in the document. That's what we did.
You didn't take out the second part of which he complained, which relates to the fire performance, because it says we knew we could rely on the product to deliver both the thermal and fire performance we required. I showed you there were two, admittedly quite quickly, two parts of the press release that he'd complained about. The second related to fire performance. Do you know why that remained in there, even though he'd complained about it?
I don't.
Can we now go to KIN 406676, please? This is an email where we see at the top of the chain you writing to Richard Burnley and Richard Bromwich, copying in Reshma Ruderman on the 24th of July, attaching the draft of the Routes to Compliance Technical Bulletin. And you say, gents, we've now finally, I know, got the bulletin ready for final review. Although we've struggled with case studies and people refusing because of the issues, we've included three off to kick off the document. Why had you been struggling with the case studies?
I think potentially because people didn't want to highlight how their buildings had got built potentially, and I know Smith Goodfellow would just get people not wanting to talk about their properties.
Right. When you say people refusing because of the issues, what issues?
I can't recall exactly what I meant by because of the issues.
Were some of the issues the fact that NHPC were not allowing K15 to pass?
It might be.
Right. Okay. You say it might be. I mean, was that one of those factors?
Potential, yes.
Right. Now, you sent the first draft, as we've seen, I think, to Cathy Barlow of Smith Goodfellow in May 2015, and we've now come to July 2015, and here is the final draft. Is it safe for us to proceed on the basis that you and your team have worked on this document now for the two intervening months, May to July 15?
Yes, that's correct.
Can we go to your second witness statement then and look at page 50, please? You can see inquiry question 23 in the middle of the page, which goes as follows. As far as you were aware, prior to 14th June 2017, had K15 been used in any external cladding system incorporating ACM panels with a PE core other than Grenfell Tower? And as at 14th June 2017, I was not aware of K15 having been used in any external cladding systems incorporating ACM panels with a PE core. Now, you were aware, I think, that Pendleton and Brook House, from the marketing literature, were external cladding systems incorporating ACM panels, weren't you? Because that's clear from the documents.
Yes.
So when you say you weren't aware of incorporation of ACM panels with a PE core, your denial there is only in relation to the PE core, isn't it?
Yes. I think
So you were taking the question as a whole and answering it literally.
yes.
you hadn't seen a desktop study which had extrapolated the safety of the systems actually being used in any of those 3 case studies I've shown you, had you?
I don't think so.
Was it safe at the time, did you think, to present these case studies to the market without either an applicable BS 8414 test for each of those systems or without a desktop study that you had seen for each such case?
I didn't think we necessarily needed to see them. We would have assumed that they'd taken an appropriate route to compliance for that particular building.
So anyone reading your route to compliance document would have to make an assumption that a desktop existed for the build-up in place in those buildings, or a compliant and successful 8414 test.
That's correct.
But you didn't take the trouble yourself to find out whether either of those conditions pertained.
No, I didn't.
Was that not risky?
No, we would just assume that if they were built, they would have taken one of those routes.
I want to turn to Ivor Meredith's disciplinary and appeal hearings, if we can, please. Now, you, I think, held a disciplinary meeting with him on the 17th and 18th of August 2015, didn't you?
Yes.
And you made the decision to terminate his employment on the 19th of August 2015.
That's correct.
And it's right, isn't it, that Ivor Meredith then appealed that termination and met Richard Burnley, who was the managing director of Kingspan, on the 3rd of September 2015 with Elaine Gale from Human Resources.
I believe so, yes.
And that at that appeal hearing, his termination was upheld, wasn't it? That's the brief story.
Yes.
Yes. Now, you've been asked about these meetings by the inquiry, and you've responded in your third witness statement to that. I think you agree that in relation to the meetings which you were involved in, you agree, I think, that the notes taken at those meetings are an accurate representation of what was said. Have I got that right?
Yes, as far as I can recall.
Yes, no, absolutely. Now let's look at the notes of the disciplinary meeting from the 17th of August, first of all. That's KIN 30222322. And let's look at the first page just to orientate ourselves in what we're looking at. It's a formal document, statement/interview document. Interviewer Adrian Pargeter, that's you. Position head of testing and marketing. Date 17th of August. Interviewee Ivor Meredith. And Susan Ewart was the management rep there. And this is one of 18 pages. And if we go to page 9, at the second I, 3 lines down, Mr. Meredith is noted as saying, in relation to a meeting with the NHBC in 2014, he said, I had to be careful, a lot of responsibility, tricky line, some would question playing in market not suitable for. Now, you said in your third witness statement, and we don't need to go to it, but if you want to, we can, it's paragraph 2.10 at the bottom of page 5 in that document, that you believed here that Mr. Meredith was referring to K15 and its use above 18 metres. Can you confirm that?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, taking into account the lack of fire testing on standard K15 and the results that you'd encountered in the Class 0 testing, did you believe that Kingspan had been specifying K15 in a market that it wasn't suitable for?
I didn't believe that, no.
You didn't believe it. So is it right that Mr. Meredith was telling you something that you didn't believe was true or correct?
No, he said some people.
Right. Some would question playing in a market not suitable for.
Yes.
I see. But you weren't one of those people.
No.
Right. Let's turn to page 10 of 18. Next page, and look at the 6th line. He says there, after group choir, business put me in a very difficult position last year. It was doing my technical integrity no good, and say that our product was okay. My mission was to derail the whole process and not much fun. See that?
Yes.
Pretend you are stupid, got a bit of help from Matt Ball, reams of paper coming through on a monthly basis, I don't miss anything. Now, you say in your witness statement that you thought those comments were being made in relation to Kingspan K5. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Why K5 only and not also K15?
Because in the lines above, he's very specific there about K5 issues, Governor of PU Europe or Convener of PU Europe. So he's talking there about the EWI issues, not K15 issues.
We can find the reference if need be, but Mr. Meredith said that he was talking about K15 as well as K5 there.
That was not my interpretation of that.
Right. Not your interpretation of what he said at the time, or not your interpretation of the note?
Both.
Right. Looking at page 14, the first I there, in the middle of the first line, he says, I have to be on top of it. And then looking at the second I, he says, why not, he says, time, definitely K15 project, making sure none of that being pulled off wall. My main goals, and this one was failing, not sure of answers and not sure what to do, making up as going along. I was trying to keep it on track, and something could complain. PW could complain. Now, you say at paragraph 2.13 of your third witness statement that you thought Ivor Meredith was referring to a large number of high-rise projects which were live, which he was keeping track of. Now, that was about 200 projects or so, wasn't it?
I believe it was at that order, yes.
And in your, let's go to your third statement, to paragraph 2.13, page 6 in that. You say there, in the fourth line down, I believe that for each of the projects on this list, Insulation UK had to provide test and certification evidence for consideration by the project architects / fire engineers to support the use of K15 above 18 metres in the proposed application as required by the NHBC. Otherwise, K15 would not be used. Now, how could Kingspan do that? How could Kingspan provide test and certification evidence for consideration by project architects, fire engineers in all these projects?
It was providing whatever evidence we got in terms of the 8414 testing.
How could Ivor Meredith be given, sensibly given, or anyone sensibly be given the role of trying to ensure the use of K15 on every project?
It was a lot of projects that were starting to come in, or had started to come in. So it was a big problem at the time.
Yes, and indeed it was a big problem, wasn't it? Because without any BR 135 certificate in place for any build-up using standard K15, there was no certification or any evidence which could support the use of K15 in any of these projects.
It was just the BS 8414 data that we got at the time.
Exactly, which Mr. Meredith knew at the time, and you've confirmed, was in fact a test done on a different product.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And you go on in your statement to say, although Ivor had, this is 5 lines up from the bottom of page 6, although Ivor had the technical knowledge to answer these questions, Insulation UK had not necessarily had to provide equivalent information previously, and so he was determining appropriate responses as queries were received. I think it was this lack of standard templates that Ivor was referring to, rather than suggesting that there was any fabrication of the truth. We've seen that it clearly was a fabrication of the truth, rather than lack of templates, wasn't it?
At the time, I didn't think that
At the time of what?
of his hearing.
You didn't think that, but he was telling you that.
If we go back to the notes of the interview.
Yeah. Certainly. We go back to the note, page 14. What did you think he was talking about in the middle of the page?
Yeah, I think he was talking about responding to the queries that were coming in.
Right. Well, let's move on through the notes. Can we go to page 15? And the second I. He says, time flies, my priorities sat with live projects, shafted by TM, that's Tony Millerchap, kept me sweet, damaged my integrity when just being told to book a test, so 50k wasted each time might take longer and works all that matters in my eyes anyhow. So you were aware at that point that, of course, he'd been to NHBC meetings with Mr. Millerchap. Were you aware at that point of the pressure Ivor Meredith was under? That's clearly what he's telling you here, isn't it?
Yes, I knew when not long after I took over that he was extremely busy.
And you knew the background to this because you knew the threat. There was a threat by the NHBC that they would not continue to approve K15 because of the lack of fire testing. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
And this is so certainly by the middle of 2015. Was it Ivor Meredith's responsibility to produce successful fire tests to satisfy the NHBC?
It was part of his responsibility. Yes.
Yes. And when Mr. Millerchap left, was Ivor Meredith given any support for that work?
I actually proposed that we take on a fire engineer to help support Ivor in his role because he was managing a team of people. And I could see he needed some support. I could see and it was the fire side of the projects that he needed support on. So I suggested we recruit a fire engineer to support him.
Now, by this time, you'd been head of technical for 3 months or so. Did you not recognise the situation that Mr. Meredith was describing here? Did you not begin to have an inkling as to what he was telling you?
An inkling of what?
Well, let's look at the middle of paragraph of page 15. He says, damaged my integrity and just being told to book a test. What did you think he was talking about?
I don't know about damaging his integrity, but I guess he was saying that he wasn't being given any direction or support previously.
Yeah. And did you not take away from this interview, at least, the impression that Ivor Meredith was under pressure to produce successful 8414 tests for K15 for the simple reason that there wasn't a reliable test for K15 under 8414 that could be used to pacify the market or placate NHBC?
No, not that point, but I think that there wasn't enough evidence.
Right. Well, let's look at the appeal hearing. KIN 408681. And these are the notes, similar template, 3rd of September 2015, Chair Richard Burnley, others present Elaine Gale. You weren't present at the meeting, but did you get to see these meeting notes afterwards?
No, not directly afterwards.
How long afterwards?
It was, I think, September 2017,
Right.
when I saw these.
Okay. Now, if we go to page 5 and pick it up from the second EG there, he says, as I understand, or it said, as I understand your role or the work you do has been fairly critical in terms of Kingspan's product being approved in terms of fire safety. I am. Yes, I would say that I've been put in a situation where I've had to maintain performance that perhaps our products don't deserve. I have the ability to show that our products can be used in areas where you would normally require material which would be non-combustible. From a critical lifesaver perspective, I performed in a number of tests in 2005. Kingspan changed the technology of our foam, and we couldn't repeat those tests. We were outed by a consultant who we then had to fabricate a story to that product still said what it did not on the tin. Although I bucked at that point and said to my manager at the time that we are stretching the truth here, and that we are going into an area where we cannot support the performance of the product. I wasn't the senior person there. We produced the documentation and we inferred to the industry that our product could do something that potentially it couldn't. With respect, this is 10 years ago, says EG. No, this was about 8 years ago now. You just said to me this was 2005. This is when the testing was done. What's happened in the last 18 months, longer than actually, a lot of those projects which we've sold into have started to come back and start to question that performance. I've been under a great deal of pressure to actually maintain that performance when it is evident through testing that our product struggles with that. We've obviously had to, I've been very busy doing a large amount of testing. There was technology that could pass, but we were struggling to get the technology to pass to justify our lie. Now, you agree in your statement, your third statement at paragraph 3.5, page 17, if you want to go to it, that Mr. Meredith is talking about K15 here. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And we looked at this earlier on in your evidence, but having undertaken the work in reviewing the historic fire testing of K15, you do recognise that Mr. Meredith is here explaining the issues that Kingspan had when they changed from old technology to new technology.
Yes.
Yes.
I believe so.
And it's right, isn't it? He is right that Kingspan were struggling to get K15 to pass an 8414 test, which they claimed that they'd had in their marketing material. That's correct, isn't it?
No, I think they've got the passes, but there are obviously those SOTEC tests that I think you may have been referring to there.
Right. And when he says, or said to Mr. Burnley at that hearing, that you inferred to the industry that the product could do something that potentially it couldn't, and then goes on in the next passage to say, doing a lot amount of testing, struggling to get the technology passed to justify our lie, the lie there was that K15 had passed a full-scale 8414 test, when in fact, what was...
I think, yeah, potentially that was what he was talking about.
Yes. And do you agree, looking back on it, that Kingspan had been stretching the truth, to put it mildly, of the performance of K15?
I'm not sure it was stretching the truth, but it was providing the evidence of the testing, but then trying to support projects that were not strictly in line with that test evidence.
It's right, isn't it, that Ivor Meredith was under pressure to perpetuate falsehoods when and because K15 kept failing full-scale fire tests?
I don't think he was perpetuating falsehoods, but he was, for want of a better phrase, he was hamstrung by the test evidence he got at the time to cover the range of applications that were starting to come through, or had started to come through. I would agree with that.
Let's look at page 7. In the middle of the page there, or about 2/3 of the way down, he says, and it's hard to find, you can see there's a large black redaction mark, and 5 lines below that he says, in the middle of the paragraph, because my boss Tony Miller chap was moving to another job role. So in his last month, he removed all of his responsibilities and said, that's your choice now. There was no one out there. There was no specialist in the marketplace. It was on my shoulders to make all of the decisions. And if anything, I kept our heads above water during that time. And although I might have been accused of parking some of my important projects, at least the 230 high-rise buildings that could have asked to remove the Kingspan insulation off them, they were never, as far as I'm aware, we managed to evade the problem. Kingspan couldn't say that we were completely happy with the construction because we weren't. We couldn't highlight it to the person we sold it to and the person at NHBC that it was an issue. So Adrian was very busy as soon as he took over the role, sales team. I like to think they were pulling fast ones. They were pushing Optima into inverted roofing, which was not acceptable. They were pushing Tech into flat roofing, which was not acceptable. There were a number of things that were obviously being slipped. They were taking advantage of Adrian's new position. Unfortunately, I took that responsibility on myself to show Adrian why these things were an issue and highlight them to him. What do you say about that? What do you say about him highlighting these issues to you?
I believe there he's referring to. Can you go back a page?
Yes, go back to page 7, please.
So he's talking about these projects here, Tech into flat roofing, and Optima, and I think what he's trying to say is the sales team were looking to try and get applications supported by the technical team, which, or to sort of expedite these applications through the technical team without a thorough review. And so he felt, that's what I interpret into that they potentially saw an opportunity in me, who was new in the role and not experienced in all of these different applications, that they may be able to do that. I don't think that was true, but obviously it seemed like his perception. So he felt he was having to block those attempts, is the way I read that.
We've seen quite a lot of this, and I know you were not at this hearing and didn't see the transcript till later. Did Richard Burnley come to you after this hearing in early September 2015 and ask you yourself about what you knew of what Mr. Meredith was telling him about not doing what it said on the tin, justifying our lie, and matters of that nature?
No, we never had a discussion about the detail.
Did you have a discussion about generalities?
Just about his overall demeanour and how he was, and I was interested to see what Richard's opinion was on whether he agreed with my decision to dismiss. Richard Burnley didn't say to you, well, he's told us some extraordinary stuff about being under pressure, having his integrity compromised and justifying a lie of some kind, and he explained to me that he told you all about it. So Richard Burnley didn't come back to you and ask you any of the detail, is that right? No, I think Richard would have been aware that Ivor was under pressure. So I think he would have already been aware of some of that.
And did Richard Burnley come back to you and ask you, or tell you that he'd been told that K15 had changed in after the BS 8414 test in 2005?
No.
When you saw this appeal note in September 2017, as you say you did for the first time, were you not surprised that Mr. Burnley had not actually asked you about any of these things or told you about what Mr. Meredith had told him?
I don't recall whether I've thought that or not at the time.
Right. Do I take it that whatever Richard Burnley did or didn't tell you about this appeal hearing, regardless of what we now see Mr. Meredith said in these notes, both the disciplinary hearing and the appeal hearing, that no internal investigation was done after September 2015 to follow up on what Mr. Meredith had said to you, to try to understand what issues he was facing and why, and to interview other people in the technical team and indeed the marketing team to find out whether there was any truth in what he was telling you?
I think from the original dismissal hearing, I don't think there was anything new in what he was saying there that was new to me. I was aware of the projects coming through. I was aware of the workload. I was aware of his team feeling under pressure. So my immediate steps, and I tried to take those steps even before he left, so with trying to support him with a fire engineer, which he didn't like the idea of, really. But I continued to pursue that, and we did eventually employ a fire engineer who was doing a master's, and I appointed Adrian Pargeter into the role to bring some steadiness and some continuity into the team, which was Adam Heath, who he mentions was under pressure, and I think Adam was certainly feeling it, but my impression he was feeling it that he just never got any support from Ivor, never knew where Ivor was, and it all started to settle down once Ad Pargeter was in place. So I'd already started to take actions, and we continued with that after Ivor left.
Did Richard Burnley tell you that he'd been told by Ivor Meredith that that Kingspan changed the technology of the foam and it couldn't repeat the tests?
No.
He didn't?
No.
And is that because, and I know you can't look into Mr. Burnley's mind, but perhaps I shouldn't ask you, but can you explain why it is that he wouldn't have told you that, given that it wasn't something you say learnt until 2016?
I think maybe because it was old news, if you like. It was 10 years before, so he may have assumed that was sorted out at the time.
But it was clearly relevant in 2015 because it was something that Mr. Meredith was putting at the heart of his problem with it.
Yes, agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of this line. There may be one or two further questions on it, but I can look at those overnight and think and shorten those. But I've come to a natural break, I think.
Well, that would be a good time to stop, because not only is it the end of the afternoon, it's been a long afternoon, Mr. Pargeter, so I think we should stop there.
Yes.
Mr. Pargeter, I'm afraid there are more questions that we need to ask you.
I understand.
And although you weren't originally asked to make yourself available for a third day, I think you have been warned, have you, that
Yes,
it
I
might
have.
be necessary. I'm sorry about that. But, yes, please, we'd like you to return tomorrow. We'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything related to it while you're away.
Of course.
And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please.